Realities, I speak truth to power without fear. Today I have a special guest, my brother Aster Saka. He also goes by the name of Brother Minister Speaks. He has a blog by that name. He's a youth minister at a church, a major church in Detroit, Michigan. He has a Bachelor of Science in accounting. And I just felt that it was important to have a discussion about the role of the church in the Black community. Because, you know, this is a very important issue. And I actually saw an article on the Atlantic Star or Atlanta Star, and I didn't actually read the article, but it raised this question. And that's what kind of prompted me to do this hangout. You know, I'm just glad to have you, man. I mean, we have discussions all the time, and I think that, you know, people would benefit from hearing a discussion and hearing the information that you have. So thanks for joining, you know, doing this. You know, I really appreciate it. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, like, what do you see the role of the Black church in the Black community? Because, like, a lot of times people talk about how you have a lot of churches in our community. Like, you have a lot of churches on every other corner in the Black community, but in many of these Black communities, you see a lot of inner city violence. You see drug dealing and all that kind of thing. And you also see in some areas a lot of unwed mothers and all that kind of stuff, and the breakdown of the Black family. So how do you see the role of the Black community, and how do you explain that contradiction, the fact that we have all these churches, but yet we don't have the level of righteousness that you would expect in that kind of environment?
Well, first, let me just say, big bro, man, you know, I'm glad to and honored that you would even consider to have me share in your blog, your live stream. I really appreciate the opportunity. You know, over the years, we have had many discussions and such, and I just appreciate you, man. You know, I look up to you very much, and I'm just glad to be considered for this forum. And let me just start all of my comments by saying that my viewpoints are my own, and they don't necessarily represent the church that I call home where I serve. Nonetheless, with that said, I want to say that the role that the Black church is very unique when we look at all the other churches that are in existence. And I want to say the African American church specifically. And I say that the Black church or the African American church plays a different role because for so long, the only role that a Black man could have that made him legitimate in the eyes of society was something that came out of the church. It was from our churches that many of our Black colleges sprang forth from. Many of the early Black businesses, and this has been the rallying point for the civil rights movement and various other significant instances in our sojourn on this soil here in North America. The Black church has been the center. So it's unique in that it has a different mission, so to speak, than our Caucasian counterparts, being that our Black church has had to play the role to rehumanize us despite the dehumanizing that society was doing to us. So what I mean by that is that Mr. Charlie told you you was nobody, but when you was at church, you was the deacon and you were Mr. So-and-so. When you was called boy everywhere else in the world, little boys called you sir. And even though you may not have completed the 8th grade, somebody was calling you doctor, just as a term of endearment and respect. So the Black church rehumanized us. And it was in this rehumanizing that we were able to organize, and then through organizing, we were able to be sustained and have a structure despite what the world gave us. Now, what we see going on right now is, let me back up and say this. A lot of the times when we talk about the breakdown of the Black Power movements in the 1960s and 70s, and even in the 50s or whatever, we mention the counterintelligence program and how its role was to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. And we are very well aware of the role it played in breakdown of the Black Panthers and the devolution of the relationship between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Brother Minister Malcolm X. But I don't think we ever really think about maybe what was the role that this counterintelligence program played in the Black church, because the Black church led the movements that really affected significant change upon the status of our people, legally at least. So now you get all of these charlatans up here, and their message isn't necessarily the gospel. Their message is some kind of get rich quick scheme for them. And then what ends up happening is that these guys have a message that's tailored to emotion. So they end up, and I say this very respectfully because I know that there is deliverance that comes from these places. But a lot of the times these charlatans hook into the most victimized segment of our community, and that's our sisters, playing to their emotions and speaking to them what their ears want to hear. And in consequence, what this does is run the strong men away. And then you're left with older men and single women and children. And you know, I don't mean any harm when I say this, but the way the scriptures basically says it is that, you know, to paraphrase and put it in my own theology there, is that the way the scripture has it is like the woman is the reflection of the man, and the man is supposed to be the reflection of his God. So if the man has walked away from God, well, who is the sister really reflected? Who is he reflected? And in turn, who is the sister reflecting? So we have, like, in my estimation, we have this self-perpetuating cycle of dysfunction. And you have these rich bloodsuckers of the poor, if I may coin the phrase, that profiteer off of this situation. And it's popular. They ain't preaching nothing too heavy on the thoughts. They ain't asking too much of you but your money. They're not challenging you and how you're living and this and that. And it's just that you're going to get a big house and you're going to get a car and get rid of Bozo because Boaz is on his way. And we got a nice choir and we can get you to crying and shouting. So you're going to join and you're going to give your money. But when it comes
so how do you bring the black man, how do you bring the black man back into the church? Like you were mentioning some of the factors as to why there aren't that many black men in the church right now. But I want to know, like, how do you bring them back? You know, how do you bring that black man back into the church?
Well, a lot of it is, in my estimation, a lot of it has to do with the way we present the gospel message. We have feminized the presentation of the gospel message in the black community. And that through a lot of misunderstanding of scripture, we have presented a weak gospel that makes people not think of you being a man if you enter church. And we have to reanalyze what we're saying. See, one thing, let me just say this. I'm a liberation theology type of preacher. I'm a liberation preacher. What I'm saying is relevant to me and mine. Now, I'm not saying the gospel excludes other racial groups, but the Great Commission is clear. The Great Commission says, go ye therefore to the uttermost parts of the earth, teaching them as I have taught you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and I am with you always to the end of the age. Now, the ends of the earth start at my doorstep. And at my doorstep, the people look like me. How can I think about the world and talk about China and over here and over there when I'm not concerned with my mans and them around the corner? So I'm concerned primarily with us. And let me just say that what we got to do is we have to represent what we're saying at church as far as it relates to what a man can relate to. It's like if you're trying to tickle the average guy's emotions, you're not going to get to him. You know, he might be sitting there after the third song, he might have just tuned you out like, hey, man, you know, the game is on. And then another thing is that, you know, we got to stop the man bashing. It's a lot of bad brothers out here, but it's a lot of good men out here too. And good brothers pay the consequence for for the few bad apples, man. Like, I'll give you a small instance of this. Statistically speaking, nowadays statistics show that most black fathers, I think it's like over 90%, are actively involved in their children's lives and pay child support. But there's
Right.
a slither of percentage that do nothing. But all of the rest of you all pay the consequence for that.
Mm. Yeah, so you were mentioning charlatans for the most part, like in part of your comments, and that
Yeah.
just brings me to my next point. And I want to talk about like Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump has received an endorsement from a significant number of black clergy. Like he had a meeting not too long ago where you had all these pastors supporting him. You know, he constantly goes to black church. Well, he went to a black church in Detroit, and he's also reached out to black ministers. And a lot of black ministers have expressed support for Donald Trump. And I want to ask you, like, how do you explain that, given the fact that Donald Trump is a man that supports racial profiling? He's a man that supports stop and frisk, which was found to be unconstitutional in New York, the way they were imposing it. They were targeting people simply based on their race, not based on any kind of reasonable suspicion for criminal activity. And that whole situation was found to be unconstitutional in New York, but yet Donald Trump says he supports that. And then on top of that, this man recently has been exposed for making all these lewd and disrespectful comments about women, talking about feeling entitled to just grab them, to kiss them and grope them, and you know, in their private areas and stuff like that. But yet I haven't heard one pastor, like I haven't heard one black pastor speak out about this. And I may have missed some pastors. I'm sure there probably are pastors that have spoken out about it, but I wonder about those pastors who endorsed him, those pastors who surrounded him at those press conferences. What do you think about that? Like the fact that they haven't said anything and that they
Well,
actually endorsed this guy.
well, I mean, if I may just be, very frank with you, big brother, man. I mean, just like there was that clown in Django that was upset
Right,
about Django riding on the horse. You always
right.
got the Uncle Tom.
Mm,
And these are these same guys, man. See, because they come from a certain brand of theology. And it's like these guys have limited the gospel message to two particular social issues right now. And the brutal reality is that they're forgetting about some of the more weightier issues. They're stuck on the religious aspect, but they're not looking at the relationship aspect. And what I'm saying by that is they think that they're worked up over morality issues. And I feel you, morality is very important, but you cannot legislate morality. You cannot. And the other part of that is if we're going to talk about scripture, in the scripture, God says he's concerned with the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the foreigner who lives amongst you.
mm,
Now, if we look at this platform that Donald Trump is standing for, he's against the foreigner. That's his immigration issues. He's against the widow and the orphan. Those are the marginalized of society in the biblical terms. Those are people who couldn't really participate because they didn't have a man there to be the covering. So they would have been in a weaker economic position. And then you have the downright poor. Donald Trump's not concerned with any of those groups. And what sickens me about this current iteration of the Republican Party that claims to be the moral vanguards is that they forget about those issues. So long as we support Israel and the Republican Party stands against gays and abortion. And that's sick. Now, in terms of these Uncle Toms that won't say anything about Donald Trump's, I think personally they've been bought off. I
mm.
think somebody has offered them some kind of influence and access to the president of the United States that they could not get with Barack Obama. And then we
Wow.
have to remember faith-based money. And a lot of these guys that run these non-denominational mega churches and stuff, and I mean no harm.
Oh, you broke up for a second, man.
Oh, I'm sorry, but a lot of these guys that are in these mega churches present it in like the Republican platform, and it all depends upon what these guys are really affiliated with. Now, our traditional denominations, he has no place in our traditional denominations. When I say traditional, I'm talking about things that are about 100 years old that we've been doing, a little bit older than that. Not none of this new stuff, fly by night, the last 20, 10 years. I'm starting my own brand of theology. And that's those guys for the most part. And I respect what they're doing because I hope that they're bringing souls to Christ. But I have a problem with their social programs, you know. And let me just say this, man. I'm not mad at anybody who's able to prosper out here. There's nothing wrong with that. Prosperity is a part of God's will. But when we make that the focal point of the message, that's what's wrong. And when we make it seem as if some kind of American policy is God's will and everything, no, man. No, this come on, let's wake up and let's get back to preaching the gospel, which kind of actually goes back to one of your earlier questions. How do we get the man in? You said, how do we get the man back in the church? And I said that we need to change what we're saying. See, we're not really preaching. A lot of people aren't really preaching good gospel messages. Like back when our grandpa was living, when he was a young man, a lot of men went to church on a regular basis. It was the center of the community. And those were good gospel messages. Something happened to change the message. But anyhow, it was yeah, these guys, man, you know, shame on them, man. You know, shame on them, especially with what's going on right now with our brothers getting killed and gunned down by these police. And this man says his solution is stop and frisk, which is only going to make this situation worse. Because you're gonna have more encounters, you know.
Yeah, and also he's been like touting this law and order thing. You know, this he kept saying law and order and all that kind of stuff when asked about how to address police brutality. That was his talking point, and that goes back to the whole Nixon era when they were cracking down on people, and they, in part, like helped launch that whole war on drugs, which has destroyed our community, man. It's like, but this is the guy that these some of these pastors support. And like you said, shame on them. It's a disgrace.
It's a disgrace. It's like, man, it's like I look at like here in Detroit, for instance. Okay, here recently we have this white mayor here. All of these preachers stood up for him, and yeah, let's get him. And now everybody wants to help build up Detroit and all of this stuff. And this guy's doing the same thing that our brother Kwame Kilpatrick is doing 28 years in prison for. But you know, he did, and them Uncle Toms, they was happy when Kwame Kilpatrick got locked up. They ain't even said a whisper of word about, good old carpetbagger getting locked up. I mean, it's just sick, man. These Uncle Tom is just it's just too much, man. But anyhow, man, I'm sorry, brother.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. Like, what do you think the church should be doing, like, right now in our community, given the state of many of our areas in the community, like the violence in some of these areas, like here in Baltimore, every other day you hear about another young person killed in these streets. And the other day I heard a story about a famous Olympic track star. His daughter was killed in a crossfire. Like, she's an innocent person who was just minding her own business, and she was caught in the middle of crossfire between two rival groups of people. And you hear these tragic stories so often. Like, I heard a story like not too long ago about this young brother who was like 9 years old, who was lured into an alley by a rival, like his father's rival gang, and they killed that brother to get back at the father. So it's like you see that kind of brutality. Like, what should the church be doing to end this violence that we see in our community? What should the church, and by the church, I'm really speaking like in a larger sense as well, like not just the Christian churches, but these groups that claim to be about God and all that kind of stuff. What should they be doing right now in our community? given
Well,
that you have the drug, the drug dealing that goes on, the destruction of the black family. So let me hear what you got to say about that, man. What you think?
okay. Well, that's a good question, man. Here's what I really think about that. I think that first off, every church, since we have so many, should have a prisoner reentry program. And they should be partnered with, or if they're not large churches, they should partner with other churches to get this thing going. This is very important, and I say this because unfortunately, a significant portion of our brothers are in the criminal justice system, and when they come out of jail, they're unemployable, and they don't have the appropriate social skills to maintain because they have been institutionalized. And I figured that a church would be a good place, to help them readjust, put them in
Hmm.
touch with the appropriate programs that would help them secure employment. Now, another with that is that I think that our churches need to have like a job banks type of thing. I think we need to have homeless
Oh, you
shelters.
cut off for a second. So can you repeat what you said, man?
I think we need to have a job banks type of thing. Like, hey,
Okay.
you have a massing of people. Okay, I think we need to have job training programs or connections to the appropriate programs. Now, all of this stuff would take money, so we would need people in the community to give, but nonetheless, they will be seeing the results. Every church should have a food pantry. And as far as it relates to all of the violence and everything, you have enough older gentlemen that goes to these churches that are retired that can control the communities that their churches are in. Just driving by with the little stoplights on during certain hours of the day, and they have like a direct walkie-talkie to a police line.
Hmm.
And then that way you have extra eyes on the street. And basically, we just have to start loving each other. The church has to teach
For a
that.
second, man. You were saying we just need to start what?
We need to teach to love each other.
Hmm.
Because see, if we love each other, then if I see something crazy going on down the street, I'm gonna try to intervene. I'm gonna try to call and say something. This no snitching thing is so bad right now because we don't care about our neighbors because we don't know each other like that. We don't, we all tough man and all of this stuff. So, well, that's them niggas over there. Excuse my language, but hey, it ain't over here. And I'm saying it's
Right.
that mentality. This was called, it makes this stuff fester. But another thing is that, um, a lot of these churches and other houses of worship are only open during the hours that they have service in terms of
Right.
worship.
Yeah. That's a
What
good
else do
point,
you
man.
do besides make noise? And I'm
Right.
saying
Right.
it's, the prayer, the Lord taught our prayer that let thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So let's make some heaven down here. So you don't have no youth
Mm.
programs for these boys that's out here, this aimless breaking in houses. You don't have an open gymnasium where they can play basketball in a safe environment, like a reading room, a computer lab. You don't have none of that kind of stuff. We need to,
Mm.
being that these municipalities don't have the budget and infrastructure to support some of these programs, it's on the churches, man. And I'm talking about like after school programs, lunch programs, and things like that. We just have to get more
Mm.
engaged. Right now, after Sunday is over and after we done shouted, we lock the doors of our church and go home to next Sunday. And a lot of that's problematic. So that's the starting point. But yeah, I mean, we could go further and say that, some people say that the black church should buy own businesses, and I mean, I'm not mad at that, but that's not necessarily a call of the church. Now, what the black church could do is encourage its membership to form investment clubs like we used to do. That's how we had all of those black life insurance companies and things like that. We could form investment clubs at every church. And in
Mm.
that way, we got some real equity because the people in the community own stocks that they can
Right.
liquidate at any time, and they can manipulate the policies and procedures at corporations and say, hey, we want your plant built over here on Mack Avenue in Detroit because we need jobs over here because then we own significant stocks. See, if we can get onto that level, then we can really
Right.
be power players. But
So, tell me a little bit about this prosperity gospel and what is it and why is it so popular right now, and how do you compare that to like a social justice agenda. You kind of touched on it. You talked about how you were into, I think it's Black liberation theology or something to that effect. So how do you compare those two? And like,
Well,
what is prosperity gospel? You know, and what should churches be doing? Like you mentioned the social justice issue.
well, our commission is clear from the Lord in that we need to go preaching and teaching, baptizing, right? So that's our commission. We need to be teaching about the life, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ and what that means in real life for you and I. Now, um, in terms of what the prosperity preachers teach, basically what they teach is that if you're righteous and blessed by God, then you have an idyllic, perfect type of life where you won't get sick. You'll be able to bring into your life all the things that you want, and God is going to do it for you if you have the faith. And if you don't have it, then you didn't have the faith. That sounds good, but it really sounds more like positive confession, New Age theology than it does of biblical Christianity. Because the brutal
Mhm.
reality is that for the first few thousand years, the first 1,000 years or so of Christianity, really being all involved in the church might have cost you your life. And you might have been extremely poor or living an ascetic lifestyle like a monk. So are you telling me that those people who laid the foundations of the church were wrong and you're right? Now, the thing is that maybe about 100 years ago or so, there was like I'm going back to kind of piggyback into this where this theology comes from and how it differs. Um, back
Right, and for those, hold on one sec. Like for those people that are just joined, you're breaking down the difference between like prosperity gospel. You explaining what it is, and then you're talking about the actual gospel of the church versus the prosperity gospel. Sorry to interrupt. So
No, you're all right. You're all right. So okay, so basically it's like this, man. In the like 1800s, there were things going on in the American Northeast called the Great Revival, right? And the second Great Revival, or one, I think one was the Great Awakening, and then the other one was like the Great Revival. And there was this fervor in like the early 1800s that the return of Christ was imminent. So you had all of these different like guys coming up with like newer theology that related to this second coming of Christ. Some of these groups are like the Mormons are one of the groups that came out during this time. The Jehovah's Witnesses come from the Seventh-day Adventists who came from that same era. Um, a lot of these cultic type of groups popped up around this time. There was a gentleman like, um, I'll leave his name out of it, but I think his name was like Kenyon was his last name, I want to say. Anyhow, is he had an idea of like positive confession, where it's like if you believe something strong enough and you confess it with your mouth, this and that, you have like the law of attraction and all of this stuff. And I know that some might believe in this, and that's fine and good. Just don't say that that's what the Bible teaches. That's all that I'm saying. And the prosperity gospel takes that kind of thought, mixes that with like the Pentecostal movement, and then they mix that with like this patriotism type of thing and this capitalism consumerism thing, and then voila, you have this new theology where you're blessed, you can have whatever you want if you believe it hard enough, and if somebody else doesn't have, it's because of something wrong with them and they didn't believe, or they're wicked, or it's because they're a sinner, or it's, all of this kind of stuff.
right.
So what's different about that in biblical Christianity is that biblical Christianity teaches that everybody is a sinner and that everything you have is a blessing from God, and it's a grace. It's something that you necessarily don't deserve, because God in the Bible judges you by what you think. not just by what you do and why you do what you do. So now, if we level that playing field down just a little bit further, all of us are sinners. We have some wicked minds. We may not act upon everything, but we think about some wild stuff. So, okay, if we go with the thinking of the prosperity people, then hey, nobody should have anything because we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of the coming of the Lord, according to the scripture. The gospel message is that Christ lived, that Christ died, and that on the third day he rose. That is the general gospel message. It's been the same for 2,000 years approximately. Now, all of this consumerism and capitalism, that's not 100 years, that's at most 100 years old. And I don't think it's going to last. In fact, when we had the economic downturn back in 2008, attendance at those kind of churches dropped off drastically.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, like, you often hear people say, well, Christianity is the white man's religion. We got it through slavery. And they talk about how Christianity is a tool used to control black people with doctrines of being obedient to your slave master. And we talked about this before we went on live, but in that movie, Birth of a Nation, like they hired the slave masters basically used Nat Turner initially, according to the movie. I don't know if it's historically accurate, but according to the movie, they used him to keep the slaves docile by teaching them to obey their master and all this and that. So I want to ask you about that whole issue about whether or not Christianity is the white man's religion, whether or not the Bible is the white man's book. This whole, what does obey your master mean according to your understanding of the Bible? And what do you think about all this, like this trend within these pro-black groups to bash the Bible and to bash Christians?
Well, that's a great question, man. That's a multifaceted, I have a multifaceted answer to that question. Is Christianity the white man's religion? Yes, yes it is. Just brutally honest. How did we get it through slavery? Yes, yes we did. But
Okay.
Jiminy Crickets, that car you driving is the white man's car too, isn't it? Yes, it is. These phones we talking on for the most part, this is the white man's phones. The Xbox, the internet, the computer, that's the white man's stuff too. Now, did black people have something to do with all of that stuff? Why, certainly we did. Did black people have something to do with the formation of the early church? Most definitely we did. How we got Christianity was through slavery, but that was because of that's circumstantial that we got Christianity. What a lot of people don't realize is that initially when we were taken captive, you couldn't become a Christian. And it was decided that it was a good idea that black people become Christians. Keep them docile later on, but at first it was looked at as being a threat.
So what do you think about like that whole the whole issue of those verses being used to control slaves by telling them they need to be obedient to their slave master and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think I mean I could twist the Bible to make it say anything that I wanted to say. Is that verse in there? Yes, sir, it's in there. Now, are we putting it in the appropriate context? Was the slavery that Paul was talking about in that scripture a slavery that told that person that they were not human beings? Was it told in the context of somebody that owned them, that was raping them and all of this kind of, no, it wasn't that kind of chattel slavery. That's number one. And then number two, the real message that he's saying there is he's telling people attitude over circumstance, basically. Because if we read it in its total context, what he's telling them basically is focus on God's goodness despite of life. So if you focused on God's goodness, you could be a good slave, even though you don't want to be a slave. But you see, here's the thing, man. Let me back up and say this. One of the primary messages of the gospel is power, personal power. that you have the power to choose what you're gonna do and the attitude that you're gonna have, despite of what's going on. So look, so if God told you to be loving and gentle and kind and merciful, and life keeps kicking you in the crotch, and your biology, your physiology, your anatomy, your masculine instinct tells you to destroy, it's personal power to say, I don't have to do what 90% of me wants to do. I choose to be the higher person. Now, do I agree necessary? That's something that I struggle with, to be honest with you. I'm not, you're going to treat me right, brother. You're going to talk to me a certain kind of way too. And I struggle with that. But again, I fall short of the glory of the coming of the Lord. And then also another thing we have to remember is this battle is not yours, it's the Lord's. So why is that relevant? It's relevant because when you choose not to fight and let God fight for you, hey man, you can have nothing but victory. And I know that sounds like some old slave religion, mystery God, spooked out type stuff, but that's real.
Yeah, I
That's
hear
real.
you. Yeah, I mean, and you use the language you were talking about, mystery God and spook God and all that kind of stuff, and that's reminiscent of the Nation of Islam language. And I want you to talk about the Nation of Islam briefly. Someone in the comments section, the sister, it's me, Mia, mentioned how she was influenced by Minister Farrakhan. She said he changed her life as a teenager, and she said that her mom's pastor didn't teach her anything. So, can you just talk about what you think about the Nation of
Of
Islam,
course, man, you
and
know
then
I can talk about Brother Farrakhan, black man. You know
all
I
right.
can. Now for our listening audience, let me just say this with all due respect. I want to say for a good part of my teenage years and early young adult years, I was a member of the Nation of Islam. And I love Brother Farrakhan and I love the Nation of Islam. I learned to study being a fruit of Islam. I learned the true need of spirituality standing in the ranks of the Nation of Islam. Um, and I thank God for my training wheels, but I'm glad that I was able to shed my training wheels. Much respect to Brother Farrakhan and the nation, but some here's my question. If I gave you I'm asking you this, big brother. If I gave you a cup of water and I told
Oh,
you it was
you broke off
80,
for a second, man. You broke
oh,
off
can
for
you
a
hear
second.
me? Can you hear
Yeah,
me
I hear
now?
you. Yeah, I hear you.
All right, so let me ask you this question, big brother. If I poured you a glass of water that was 80% pure but 20% poison, would you drink it, black man?
No, sir. No,
All right.
sir.
Now it looks good, black man. It looks like it'll quench your thirst. You sure you won't drink it?
No, I'm good.
All
Yeah.
right. Now, if I handed you a glass of water, let's say you real thirsty now, it's one of the real hot days. I had canned you a glass of water. The water looked kind of fuzzy, but it's clean water, it's pure. It just looked funny. Would you drink that or would you drink the stuff that got 20% poison?
I'll drink the other one, the one that looks
Right.
funny.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in a likewise manner, that's the best analogy I can say about the nation. There are some very good things about the Nation of Islam, wrong things with the Nation of Islam too. And I say that very respectfully. And I'm not necessarily talking about the historic Nation of Islam under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I wasn't alive for that. I'm talking
Mhm.
about what we see right now. There are some very wrong things with it. Now, the supreme wisdom lessons were the same, but um, you know, truth is truth, and truth doesn't change over time. Immemorial, what goes up must come down. From time
Mm.
immemorial, light has moved at 186,000 feet per second. Since time immemorial, the Earth been spinning at 1,037 and 1/3 miles per hour. From time immemorial, the sun has been 93 million miles away from the earth. from the earth. 6 sectillion tons for forever. And those are the truths, right? Now, I could play some tapes from today and play some tapes from 1995 and play some tapes from 1985, and 1965, and they all say a different truth. Something's wrong with that, brother. And I'll just leave it at that.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. And so what do you think about, like, well, let me just move. I don't want to get too deep. I think that
No, go
I don't
ahead,
want to
man.
offend anybody, man. But I was wondering, like, what do you think about, like, I mean, at least here in Baltimore, you see these groups of people on the street, like they're dressed in these outlandish outfits, and they're like professing to be Hebrews, and they have these signs that say, that talk about all these different tribes, and they're on the corners like trying to preach, and they're yelling at people and all that kind of stuff. Are you really familiar with like that branch of religion, and like what do you think about like that, and why do you think a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, some people are gravitating towards that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First off, those brothers are doing what I'm telling you the church needs to do in terms of engaging these brothers that's in prison. So that's why them
Right.
guys on the corner, Mr. Tough, man, because a lot of them straight out the pen. And that knowledge right there has been what's anchored them and kept them from going crazy.
Right.
Now, with that said, is that let me go back to my analogy about the clean glass of water with the 20% poison. That stuff look good, I mean, because it helps them guys. But it's got some poison in it, brother. And what I mean by that is just like, man, listen, the God of the Bible is not into racism. And then let's look at some of their logical fallacies of what they're saying. First off, some of these guys go so far as to say the earth is flat and the sun rotates around the earth.
Yeah, I've heard some of that stuff. Yeah.
That is absurd.
Right. Yeah, it's just funny how people will believe just about anything. Like some of these these pseudo pro-black cults, actually believe that black people are from another planet. I mean, that's how extreme these
That's
people
that
go,
Dr.
man.
York foolishness, man.
Yeah.
But see, here's my thing, man. Go back to what I said. The truth is the truth is the truth is the truth, and it doesn't change. These guys have to change up all the time. Like those guys you were just referencing, standing on the corner. If you had heard them in 1999, you had heard them closer towards when Obama got elected. A lot of them were moving to Egypt, and some of them got stuck over there in the Arab Spring. And they were going to be going to Israel because Jesus was coming back, and all of this kind of stuff. Here's my thing. Let's look at some of the logical failings. Those people will tell you that they are not Africans. All right, they're not no stinking Africans. We're the 12 tribes of Israel. So you telling me this white man who snatched you up out of Africa and loaded you on the slave ships like cargo, able to distinguish which African was a Hebrew and which wasn't, or which black person was a Hebrew and which wasn't. And you think this greedy white man even cared? Or do you think he wanted workers on the field? I think he wanted workers on the field, black man.
Yeah, I hear you. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then another failing of their theology is that let me just back up and say this. Anybody trying to lift up black people, I got your back, but we're not gonna confuse that with trying to mix in spiritual truths with that. If you're trying to help the black man, let's go. But when you start trying to say it's in the Bible, that's when I got a problem. If it's not in the Bible, if you twist in the Bible, that's when I got a problem. But then another thing that these guys say is they make all of these distinctions between the different African groups and the or New World Africans in the diaspora and say they're this tribe or that tribe. And the brutal reality is me and you are brothers, same mother, same father. Back in the slave trade days, you might have went to Brazil, but I might have went to Jamaica. They
Right.
didn't
Yeah, that's
care.
real.
So that's another absurd thing they teach. Man, they say what they say is that our enslavement was a fulfillment of Deuteronomy chapter 28.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. Like, that's a good point that you just brought up, because I was just wondering. Like, I've openly asked about that. Like, they say that like we are punished, we are enslaved because we were disobedient. They tried to like rationalize our enslavement, and I wanted to get your thoughts about that. What do you
Man,
think about that?
you know what? I think that's an affront to our ancestors. I think it's also an oversimplification of the facts.
Mm.
The fact of the matter is that in about 1492, we had a collapse of some. First, the Moors were expelled out of Spain. And with them coming back into North Africa, it kind of destabilized some of the existing empires and kingdoms. And what resulted was infighting. The infighting produced slaves, the white man profiteered, and then the slaving became an industry in and of itself.
Right.
It is an unfortunate circumstance, but it was an economic proposition and situation. To ascribe any kind of overarching plan of God to that is an affront to my God. And have to play no games like that. Why would he punish? You know, they're saying that they were being punished for something that happened back in 587 BC.
Wow.
Now check it out. There was no living memory of the law of Moses if we had migrated all the way from the Middle East to Senegal, and we didn't even speak Hebrew anymore or have Hebrew names. We didn't have any living memory of what God would have been mad at us about. So that makes God unjust, and I can't get with that.
Me neither, man. For real, because I had a debate like right after I saw that movie, and you got to check it out, man. Birth of a Nation. You know, there are a lot of issues around it, but I was just asking myself, like, why would that happen? And then, you know, why would a just God allow something like that to happen? You know, just thinking about it, man. You know, just thinking about that idea, and in response to that, some people cited that scripture that you mentioned. You know, trying to justify it by saying that it was punishment for what we had done as a people. And yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page with you, man. It's you know, I hear what you're saying, man.
Man, this is all that I'll say about it is that I think that just like how we see tragedies now that unfold the world over, I think the inappropriate question to ask is, where is God? That God is in his glory on his throne right now, looking at the situation saying, where is man? Because he put us here to be, what do they say, the vice regent on this planet.
Right. That's right.
So therefore, you got the ability, if God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, you got the ability to do something right now.
That's right.
Yeah. My thing is this, our brothers sold each other. They didn't know that colonialism was coming behind the slave trade. They didn't know that. They didn't know that behind colonialism was neo-colonial. They didn't know that. We didn't know that behind Reconstruction was Jim Crow, and behind that was mass incarceration. We didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? Hindsight is 2020.
Right.
And I'm saying is that to pin all of this on God, man, I can't get with that, man. You know. But anyhow, man. But
yeah, that's deep. Yeah. So let me ask you this about the church. Like, often when you hear about the black church, you hear like these worst case scenarios, like people will point to a Eddie Long or Creflo Dollar. They'll point to pastors who womanize in their congregation, who commit adultery, and you know, commit all kinds of vile and despicable conduct. And you know, they talk about like how, for instance, like Creflo Dollar, you know, he was talking about like how he thinks that people that don't pay their tithes should be killed, you know, brought out front and lined up and shot with Uzis and stuff like that. And then not too long ago, you know, he had that whole thing where he was demanding that his followers help him raise like 60-something million so he could get a jet and all that kind of stuff. While these communities fall apart, like, you know, the issues that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So what do you think about that stuff? And then also, you know, I don't think we talked about it, but that whole protest in Detroit where a congregate, you know, some community activists held a protest in a church. So tell me what you think about all those things. I mean, I know it's a lot, but I want to hear what you think.
Well, let me just back up and say this, man. I'm going to say this. I'm not mad at Creflo for wanting that jet. I'm not mad at him for having a mansion and a Bentley. I'm not mad at him for having $1 million salary. So long as I don't know what his church does, but I would hope that they're giving, you know, infinitely more in charity and good works, because the scripture says a servant is worth his hire. So Jiminy Crickets, if brother needs a jet, flying worldwide to feed people. I know he's not just going flying around to give speeches and sermons and teach. I hope he's going to do something. But again, I got to go with the charlatan thing. And it's like, it's sad because the media will aggrandize that, but they're not aggrandizing the little church on the corner that had to pay for grandma's funeral, or you know, thug life that got shot up paying for their funeral, but can barely keep the lights on. They
Right,
don't
that's real.
tell that
Yeah.
story. They don't tell about how, you know, some of these people in these little small churches scrape together pennies and put people through college, and that kind of stuff still happens.
Right.
But that's the big headline, though, because that we gravitate to it because it's big, it's shiny, it's flashy. Um, and I think once again, like with the Donald Trump pastors, it's a shame. It's a shame
Mm.
that you will have grandma sending in her little social security money so you can have a jet and you ain't doing nothing with it.
Right.
See, now this gonna sound like that pie in the sky type of stuff, but you know, in the scripture it says that Jesus in the last days, he says, and it's part in the gospel, that he gathers his sheep on his right hand and his goat on his left. And he says to the sheep, you know, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into thy rest. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you gave me clothes. When I was sick, you came to visit me. When I was in prison, you looked after me. And he
Mm.
said, enter into thy rest. But then he looks to the goat and he says to them, you know, uh, be gone with ye, you doers of iniquity. I knew you not. I was hungry, you did not feed me. I was naked, you did not clothe me. I was homeless, you didn't give me shelter. And he says, but Lord, when did I see you like that? And he said, what you did not do to the least of these brothers of mine, you did not do unto me.
Mm.
Now, notice in that scripture I just referenced that the goat and the sheep both thought that they belonged to the master. So, brothers running around here doing this thing, prosperity and this and that, but I wonder, is he doing the work of the master? Um, I wonder, is there a cross in his church? Now I know it's to be said, you know your religious convictions, but just look at some of these big name preachers next time you doing some channel surfing and try to see if you can find one cross in the church. Listen to the message for a minute. Do you hear any mention of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? You're not going to find those are hard to find in those kind of churches. I'm going to
Mm.
tell you the message you're going to hear in those churches. It's like a scripture that says Joseph prospered. You're going to hear that sermon. You're going to hear, I want you to prosper as your soul prospers. You're going to hear that message. You're going to hear, I own the cattle on 1,000, you know, God owned the cattle on 1,000 hills, and the hills are his also. You're going to hear those kind of messages. You're not going to hear about, the gritty, grimy reality, the sacrifice, the love. You ain't hearing that. So now let me just talk about this new era group and protest in Detroit before I go off on a tangent. Are you there, Anson?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you broke off for a second, so you can start back over about that group.
Okay, so New Era Detroit, let me just say this. They have my respect. Brothers, I see, and sisters, I see what they do in terms of standing up.
So who are they? So just for people that don't know, like I'm not familiar with them, and for others who don't know, like what are they? Like who are they, and what are they about?
Well, they're a community action group. So like, let's say you have a store where the one of these gas stations. You from Detroit, so you know what I'm talking about. One of these gas stations, one of our Otterbeck friends might pull a gun on somebody or something to shut that gas station down. Ain't nobody coming in here and nobody going out. Not to that guy.
Man, I wish we had something like that in Baltimore, man. If we had something like that in Baltimore, I would sign. I think I heard a little bit about that. So yeah, so tell us about this protest again, man.
So basically what happened is Donald Trump visited Wayne T. Jackson's church. And Wayne T. Jackson, enough respect, I don't mean any harm, but let's remember, this is the man who sells water that says it can heal you, and prayer cloths, and all of this kind of stuff. He's one of these prosperity. Ain't no cross on his building. Ain't no cross in his church. He ain't preaching the life, death, resurrection of Jesus. They meet on Saturdays. All right, he's all that kind of stuff. Now, so the Saturday after Trump was there, New Era Detroit shows up. Now, I don't agree with them doing that in that manner, to go into this house of worship. They could have got their point across. For instance, they could have blanketed every car in the parking lot with flyers to make them aware.
Right.
They could have stood outside and held a protest when Donald Trump was there and the following Saturday. And the reason I'm saying that I find it problematic for them to go in there is because, love them or hate them, somebody in that church is getting some spiritual nourishment out of what's being taught there. I may not agree with the message. I might hate the way it's delivered. I might not like the man delivering the message, but somebody's getting something out of it. Now, with that said, far be it from me to intrude upon your walk with God just because I got a point to prove. Far be it from me. I have a problem with that. But I mean, basically, hey, my man and them got it, came up in there getting live or whatever, and they security came down on them like the FOI. And hey, I can't lie. If I was sitting up in my church and some young hoodlums, enough respect, brother, but I still got that FOI in me. I'm not too afraid of nothing. So some young guys get live about something that's happening. Hey, you got to go, brother. You got to go.
So other than like the way they did it, what do you think about the sentiment behind it, man?
I agree. I agree. Look, man, if we do this again, man, we have to do it during the day. But I would love to show you the video of some of these neighborhoods in Detroit, brother.
Yeah, man.
Things have changed drastically since you left here, man. Drastically, man. Detroit is a dangerous war zone in some areas almost. And I hate to say it, but what's kind of exacerbating it is these medical marijuana dispensaries. And the reason I say that is because at least back in the day, the little young guys was hanging at the gas station selling weed or something, Now they can't make no money off that, really. So they at the gas station carjacking, you know what I'm saying?
Wow, man.
Or they breaking in people's houses, you know what I'm saying? Or just, hey.
So what do you think about that? Remember, like, there was a group called the Detroit 300. Is that still around? Like,
yeah, that's still around, man. That's still around. Yeah.
So what do you think about what they're doing, man? Trying to
Awesome,
deal with the
awesome,
violence.
awesome. I'm gonna tell you why I really like it. And I keep saying when I get a little bit more free time, I'm gonna be more involved in that. Because what I like about it is it's at least for a long while, it was a partnership between a lot of the men's groups at churches and the FOI. And I'll, maybe
Oh,
I'm.
the FOI was a part of that?
Oh yes, brother. Oh
Okay.
yes, oh yes. And there's a lot we can learn from the churches from the FOI, and just in terms of organizational skills and execution, and enough respect to that. I mean, seriously, all jokes aside.
So
Um,
tell people what they did. Like, what kind of stuff did they do in the
oh
neighborhoods and
man,
stuff?
if they have these rapists, like these rapists and kidnappers and stuff like that, man, hey, the Detroit 300 come and shut down the neighborhood. You know, like for real. You seeing some of these big swole guys, man, just coming through the neighborhood patrolling, and they eventually catch these people, man. Because remember what I said earlier about the older guys, like they could patrol the neighborhoods at certain times of day. Remember I said that?
Right,
I got that
right.
idea from the Detroit 300. So basically, if you,
So that's a lot of church. Well, that's like a shining example of something the church is doing in the hood to address problems and stuff, man.
yeah, it's just not a lot. And you see how even though you're in Baltimore, you've heard of the Detroit 300, right? But nobody,
Right, right.
nobody puts emphasis on the fact that a lot of the church groups are doing this. Remember how back in the day when we were growing up, they used to do Devil's Night here.
Right, yeah.
But that don't happen too much like that no more, right? Because the churches and the Masons and the fraternities and all of the brothers, man, they got these like watch groups that patrol. Like little stuff still happen, but nowhere near like before. Nowhere near like before. But that doesn't get blasted. But when the pastor is sleeping with his little wife, somebody's wife, or stealing the money, or getting, you having law settlements with the little boys or something, we see that on
Man,
the
that's sick.
TV, but
Man, I mean, that whole Eddie Long situation is sick, man.
it's
You know what I'm saying? Like,
despicable, man.
yeah, I mean, it's like that took it to a whole nother low, man. I never seen. I mean, I've heard about like you've heard about those Catholic priests and all this and that, but like a black minister, like uh, basically tricking out these boys and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Man,
Like
come
buying
on,
them.
man.
I mean,
Hey,
I mean
man,
that's
come
just some crazy stuff,
on.
man.
Man, come
I'm
on.
just like, man. But let me ask you, like, what? I mean, I just wonder why these congregations don't hold these pastors accountable for that kind of stuff, man. I mean, the
They
guy is
do.
still preaching. I mean, the guy is still preaching, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's still in charge of that church.
Well, see, that's one of the things is when you have in a traditional church, like my church, for instance, the people that make the decisions, operations of the church, kind of like the board of directors are the deacons. A lot of these non-denominational churches, the reason they exist in that format is because the pastor wanted to do away with that formal structure by which the deacons run the church and can fire him or her. So I think that's what's going on there. You can't fire Eddie Long. That's his church. You see what I'm saying?
So
And
it's like more of a cult of personality in those types of situations where it's like it revolves around the pastor instead of like the church as an institution where you have and all that kind of stuff that can hold them accountable, I guess, under that, that kind of setup.
right, exactly, man. So what happens is he's like going rogue, man. You know what I'm saying? He's like a rogue agent. He's just running wild. He doesn't have any accountability necessary. Um, but here's my thing, man. Is if that was his thing, you know what would have been so much better that he could have done is if he just came and said, I struggle with this. I'm trying, but I know I wasn't born like this. That would be a good witness for a lot of people that might struggle with that. You know what I'm saying?
See, because in Christianity, you know, a lot of the things we go through, we really going through so we can tell somebody else how we made it through. That's how we're supposed to view life struggles. So with that having been said, is that he could have used that as a witness for the kingdom, but he hid behind, you know, I mean, that's what makes him, you know, just he doesn't have any credibility to me. But I mean, I just wonder personally, like, man, when I saw the brother got a good look at him on some of his telecasts, I'm like, y'all didn't know this years ago? Because I mean, look at him, man. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
it just seems like they would have some kind of clue, man. You know,
Yeah, yeah, man. Wearing muscle shirts and stuff in the pulpit, like,
he wore that stuff in the pulpit,
yeah,
man.
man, with gold chains and stuff. Like, man, this guy is a bona fide Negro for sure. Like, wow, wow, y'all having a fish fry afterwards? Like, barbecuing and stuff. What's going on? So I don't know though, man. So you had an encounter with the Hebrew Israelites, huh?
Not too much. Like I haven't like had any personal interaction with them or whatever. But there were some people, like I was saying, within the comment section trying to rationalize, you know, slavery and all that kind of stuff. So what do you think about these people that talk about like how Christians worship a white Jesus and a white God and all that kind of stuff? Like we kind of touched about on
Oh,
oppression and stuff. But
yeah.
what do you say about that, man? Like the white image of Jesus that's in a lot of these churches and
I'm glad you brought
all that
that
kind of
back
stuff.
up, man. Because you know what, I went off on a tangent, but it was something very important that I wanted to say about all of the white man's religion and the white image of Jesus. We got our Christianity by way of Western Europeans. So our Christianity descends from theirs with their depiction of Christ and all this. But the Ethiopian church has been around for nearly 2,000 years, and they have a black Jesus, and they've never been conquered by
Right.
Christ and none of that. So that kind of undermines the whole white man's religion thing. But nonetheless, going back to what the white God, um, I personally do not conceptualize God as having any race or being anything like anything I can fathom truly
Mm-hmm.
as a
Right.
limited, finite human being. So we're talking about the God who just by the power of his word invented light. And the
Right.
color
Right.
of your skin is merely the spectrum of light that is reflected back. So if God existed before light, how can he be white or black? But
Mm.
going back to what we're saying here, we have to undo the diabolical effects of white supremacy. To purge all of our churches of a white Jesus. And we have to stop making these religious movies. And we just need to tell the story. As crazy as that sounds, because it's
Right.
equally wrong to make the black Jesus. Because if you still operating with a white supremacist paradigm of thinking, you will have a black Jesus, but he'll look just like the white Jesus.
Right. I've seen a lot of those pictures too, like
He
where they
don't
have
look
them.
like you and me. He don't look like he came from Ghana. He looked like Jesus with a major suntan and some dreadlocks or something. And it's like, I mean, you know, come on
Yeah.
with all of that, man. You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, this is what I say to all of that, man. Um, you know, we just got to get rid of that image, and we have to counteract it when we see it in place.
Right.
You know, one thing I will say about you know, about the Orthodox Muslim world is that they don't allow any depictions of Muhammad at all. And I think that's good because I think it discourages any form of nationalism. Even though that's present in the Islamic world too, but not
in terms of how people see God necessarily.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and I think that part of our issue with that is that these these images that we see. Ironically, the Ten Commandments say don't have any images of anything in heaven above. So,
Right.
but
Yeah.
anyhow,
So what do you think about like you were mentioning Ethiopia and all that kind of stuff. Like, so what do you think about like the Rastafarians? And I mean, we've talked about that privately, in our own separate conversations. But like, what do you think about the Rastafarians and the whole Garveyite movement? Like how they basically saw religion as a vehicle for liberation and stuff. To
well,
liberate us as a people.
well, see, I told you I'm a a liberation preacher, so I'm with that. Um, I'm with I often think about this, and I've said it before, but I think that if I lived in Jamaica, I might be a Rastafarian. And I'm not talking about nothing about no weed, but Rastafarians, at least the ones I met in Jamaica, are really Christians. They just believe that Haile Selassie, his imperial majesty, was like a second coming of Christ for the black man. And there are many questions I have about it, but I have a respect for what they're saying. Those brothers are profoundly deep. I've never been around quote unquote unlettered, unlearned people that were as wise and informed as those brothers. I mean, those guys broke down the Bible in ways that theologians do. And
Mm.
this is just from reading the Bible every day and smoking their chalice. So I have a profound respect for them. And the back to Africa thing and all of that, man, it's deep, man. It's deep, brother. It's deep. It's deep, man. So I mean, I respect what the Ross. Like I said before, man. If you talking about liberation of the people, I'm with you. Only time I got a problem is when you try to say something that's in the Bible
Right.
that's not there. I try to twist the Bible to make it justify something you're talking about. But I mean, the Rastas, 95% of everything they say is in the Bible, so it's like very interesting to me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, so it's been real, man. This has been a great discussion, and I want to have more of these, man. We're gonna have to do more of these hangouts and stuff like that. And I just want to check over the comments to see if there's anything else we should respond to before we close out. Yeah, when you get to a laptop, you'll be like the next time we do it. If you're at a laptop, you'll be able to see all the comments and stuff.
Oh man, I should have, man. My laptop right here. I didn't even think to pull it out, man.
Yes. Yeah. So next time, yeah, I think most people like didn't like. There was one troll on here trying to say some stuff. I had to block and ban him, but most people, I think most people just listening.
What was the troll saying, man?
He was talking about be a good slave, like basically saying that's that old slave religion and blah blah blah, and laughing his ass off and all this and that. So I just had to block and ban him.
Oh man, I wish I had a song, man, because I mean, here's my thing about all this slave religion stuff, man, is that all this tough man stuff y'all brothers on, not you, Anson, not you, big brother, but all of these other atheist clowns out here, all this tough man stuff you on ain't keeping you strong to pay child support. But the white man's religion, slave religion, as you said, made the black man strong enough to run and fight and get his mind, keep his mind right, and still be the man that he was born to be in his house, even though he couldn't be it out in the world. So you go ahead with your atheism. 50 years of walking away from the black church, and what's happened to our community? So people can say what they want, but what I'm talking about, even what you believe in, is time tested, brother. This atheism and anti-religion, anti-God stuff is some millennial stuff, and it's horrible, man. But on another note, I digress. Man, we'll have to do this again, man. You know what I'm saying? It's always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Yeah, we're gonna have to definitely do this, man. I mean, I thought we had a great discussion, and I'm sure there are gonna be comments later, because a lot of people, they don't watch it live; they may watch it later. So yeah, man, thanks a lot for participating, and we're gonna build again. Just keep building. And this series is called "Build with My Brother," man. So
Oh
that's what.
man, man. That's what's up, man. That's what's up,
Yeah, so
man.
that's what we're gonna do, man. We're gonna have these videos from time to time.
Okay.
Just build, man. Just drop knowledge and stuff. But
Hey,
thanks
indeed.
again, man.
Hey, no
So I'm
problem, brother, man. Peace, man. I'll talk to you, Anson.
all right. Peace.